Apologies for being slightly late. We are expecting 2 more members and very much hope that they are just being held up in on the journey. But we'll see where we get to. So welcome everybody to today's Partnership Board. We have apologies for Eamon Keogh, Simon Curry, Lulu is now coming, we hope, David Roby, Vince, Lucas, Ellie Burrows and Richard Leonard. And we've got Tom here from DFT, from Highways, sorry, wrong one. I just promoted you, Tom. There you go, Highways. So housekeeping, if you remember, we will be recording the meeting and it will be streamed live to our TFSE and the YouTube channel and available to watch following today's meeting on our website. And when you speak, if you could just say your name, then it will help the viewers understand who's speaking. Councillor David Roby sent me a letter highlighting some issues, and I think rather than go through them individually, I'll bring the comments into the general discussion as we get to them. If not, they will all be noted and worked upon. So it takes us to agenda item 2, which is the minutes from the previous meeting. And you've all had the draft minutes earlier. And is there anything on there that I need to correct before I ask you if we can sign them as a true record? Thank you. And there were a couple of things to update the board on freight. Mark Vallely has provided an update to Councillor Simon Curry on the freight work stream. Thanks for that. Technical call-off of the contractor note was added to the minutes, noting that Sarah Valentine had checked with the accountable body procurement team, who confirmed that the contract was procured under the ESPO framework, which was procured under the Public Contract Regulation 2015. So it would appear we are doing the right thing there. And the intermodal rail freight study, Mark again provided further information to Councillor Sophie Cox in relation to that study. So thank you all for that. We now come to, I will sign the minutes, declarations of interest. Are there any further declarations anybody needs to make? No? We have no statements to the public. So we move on to agenda item 5, which is the Ordnance and Governance Committee update. And I'll ask Councillor Dennis. Joy, will you take us through it, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just obviously there's a paper in there, just put the highlight.
Sorry, could you use your mic for the recording?
Is that right? You can, yeah, fine, lovely. Thank you, Chair. There is a short paper in the papers, which I'm assuming everyone has read, and I can see there's some points there. I just think I'll just highlight a few points. Firstly, the business plan. You can see that we got an increase of 4.7% in from the DFT, and we were given an opportunity to provide views on where to allocate that increase in funding. The DFT had, their expectation was it was allocated the Centre of Excellence in the Analytical Framework. There were some interesting conversations about that, but it was agreed that we came to an agreement to increase for the increase to be split equally between the two, those two particular areas. On the finance side, we reviewed the finance position to the end of January. We'll see that is the next item on the agenda. Following that meeting, an update was then requested and sent to us about spend to the end of February. We sought assurance on the carry forward, and the reason being we could see that significant carry forward was being forecast. We've had a note since, and I say those are in the paper. The forecast now is indicating the carry forward will be less than it was last year, and it's committed. But we did have some concerns about the amount of carry forward that was being continued, and we'll follow that again during the year. We looked at the risk register, we reviewed that, and we approved the new risks that have been added in relation to the spending review. and the work on the TFSE governance following devolution developments. If you remember, we had some conversations. And then lastly, we looked at the forward work, and we had two key focuses on that, looking oversight of the delivery of TFSE's work stream and reviewing TFSE's role to ensure it remains aligned with the evolving needs of our members as part of the government's devolution agenda. And also the Pacific work set out to assure the value for money that TFSE provides, including through its use of external suppliers. I think that's just sort of the highlights that we went through. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Sorry, questions and comments. Are there any? I mean, from my perspective, the amount of work that's done in the committee is extraordinary, and so thank you all for that. It gives us, as a board, the reassurance that that you've gone into it in depth. So, my thanks to you all. No other comments. Then we are recommended comment. So we now move on to agenda item 6, which is the financial update. And I think, Keir, you're going to introduce. Thank you.
£1. And that was broadly good news. That was because we'd actually been able to make efficiencies in the way we were working, and that money was all able to allocate to more technical work next year. At the time, in January, we said that our intention is to spend as much as possible in the remainder of the financial year to bring the rest of the carry forward to as close as zero as we could. As Councillor Dennis has just mentioned, since then, we did find out that our accountable body, East Sussex County Council, are changing finance system in March, which has basically meant we're not able to make any payments for the majority of the month of March. Because of this, our carry forward will look slightly higher than initial work that we've already procured and is already well underway, and will all be spent early in the next financial year. So, yeah, none of that additional money is available to reallocate like it was previously.
Thank you. Again, an awful lot of work with some good explanations. Are there any other comments or questions? Hi, Lulu. Thank you. Welcome. Trevor.
Thank you. Thank you for that summary. And I wasn't so aware of the Sussex County Council constraint on their financial system. I'm sure that's all in order. The 577,000 carry, if I understand correctly, carrying over to next financial year. What's the value of money spent before the end of the financial year? Is it equivalent to that, or is it committed for works beyond the into the next financial year where some of that money will be spent? So we'll get a breakdown of that.
Yeah, so all of that we forecast, the whole 577,000 will all be, it's all committed, but won't be spent in March because we're unable to. So it will all kind of go out of the door in basically April and May, just at the start of the next financial year. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's not quite my point. So I understand the committed and the spend, but will the value of them, the value of money spent, i.e. the value of work done by the end of March, be that, or whether it's just a commitment, and are there suppliers sitting there waiting to get an invoice paid, which is taking 6 weeks longer than they want it to, etc. So I want to get a feel for where the value of that money, the value of the work done, is of that, or if it's something that's going to be happening more in April.
Yeah, so the finance paper breaks it down in a little bit more detail, but the majority is work that will be completed in March, and like you say, the supplier will have an invoice ready for us that we're just waiting to pay. There are 1 or 2 elements of work that won't be completed in March, but will actually be completed early in April and May, so then we'll get the invoice from then. So, it's, as I said, that the majority is work that will have actually been finished, but I think you're right that there is a little bit that will happen in April.
Thank you. Rupert.
Yeah, Chairman, if I may, I think one of the bits that's caught us out is this transition from SAP to Oracle, and it's meant that from the 7th of March, we can't pay any invoices, whereas normally you pay right up through March, and it's sort of it's quarters. But it means that as soon as that transition is made, we're able to pay. And I think there's something like 780 odd thousand that's committed. What hasn't changed is the 370 that the board agreed to allocate to, I think it was 4 different work streams. So the size of the sort of carryover, if you like, has been caught by the SAP to Oracle transition.
Hello, thank you. I'm Daniel Ruiz, representing the business community. I'm trying to force myself to ask a cynical question. There will be some pieces of work that are not quite 100% complete, but for which we will receive invoices to coincide with the end of the financial year. How are we ensuring that the quality of work is being delivered in a timely manner?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that goes to Councillor Muton's point. Where work hasn't been finished entirely, we won't pay for the invoice. There is some work that straddles both financial years, namely the transport strategy is a big example where, as the board know, we've finished it, it's gone out for consultation. Now we just need to analyse consultation responses and then amend the transport strategy. That will broadly finish in May and June to be brought back for the July board. So that's an example where we won't pay those final invoices until the work's done to a satisfactory standard.
Great, 'cause I want us to be able to reassure our listeners and ourselves that we will persist in delivering the highest quality work, the work that we've got a reputation for. Thank you.
So, are we all happy to, members of Partnership Board were recommended to note the current financial position for 24-25 to the end of February 25. We're happy to do that. Good. Thank you. And welcome to Councillor Bowen, Lulu, and to, sorry, I will get to know you, John, Councillor Ennis from Berkshire, so welcome. Thank you. We now move on to the agenda item 7, which is responses to consultation. And Rupert, I think you're going to introduce this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. So there are 5 responses here, each detailed within the paper. One is a response to Western Gateway, subnational transport body, around their strategic investment plan and their consultation on that. One is the Transport Select Committee's call for evidence on rail investment pipelines. And this is entitled A Boom or Bust, and this is in relation to the way the industry goes in these sort of sine wave cycles of lots of cash, no cash, lots of cash, no cash. And then the draft response to Kent County Council's Bluebell Hill Improvement Scheme consultation. Draft response to the Integrated National Transport Strategy call for ideas, and some of you may have attended one of the workshops. And then the final was the phasing out of sales of new petrol and diesel to support zero-emission vehicle transition. So there are 5 responses there. I don't intend to go through the detail that's within the paper, other than to take questions if members wish.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Apologies, I didn't get to the meeting. I had got it in my diary, but something changed. No? Tim, and then I'll come to Matt.
Just looking at the Bluebell Hill response, quite strongly comes through that part of the rationale for this scheme is accommodating future increases in traffic. Now, I'm not against that because that will sometimes be necessary. But I'm just trying to reconcile it with the move away from a predict and provide strategy, as it were, to a decide and provide strategy. Just conveniently, as a case study, raises the question as to how far we're really still in the position of predicting and providing, given all the housing development and so on that's taking place. And I understand the dynamics of that very well. But are we kidding ourselves that we can really run a decide and provide strategy, which is intellectually a major shift in our approach? But the predictions keep coming in.
I don't think facts will ever change.
No.
And facts will always be a factor in where we go, as opposed to it being the ultimate factor.
Mm-hmm.
It's now a part of our thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That would be my take.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I think it's a fair challenge.
Yeah.
You know, schemes like the Bluebell Hill improvements, we know, you know, it's as a matter of fact, there are high traffic volumes. We know there have been historic road safety issues. We know there's housing pressure coming, and you know the potential impact of the Lower Thames crossing would have generated additional traffic. So, you know, there is a sort of an issue, a problem that requires thinking about there for Bluebell Hill. And I think there are a number of examples across the southeast where similar situations arise. And I think from a strategy perspective, to move to, as you say, you know, it's an intellectually far superior place, is absolutely right. You know, and the strategy works over quite a long period of time. So I guess, you know, what we're saying is it's not going to be an instantaneous shift, but we need to make that intellectual and policy shift towards how we provide, you know, transport infrastructure over the next, you know, 5 to 25 years. But we also have to recognise there are some really knotty issues within the region that, you know, whatever policy approach you take are not going to go away, even with the best thinking in the world. And we need to sort of, you know, grab those. I think as a subnational transport body, I think the members have been great in saying, you know, going through that sort of bring out your dead moment. You know, so the schemes that have been on the books for 30 or 40 odd years, I think, you know, through the MRN and LLM process, you know, members have been, you know, courageous in saying, well, actually, you know, that's not going to go forward. So the ones that we have left and identified in the SIP have a need. But I think the point you make is a fair one, and it's how we make that leap, you know, over the duration of the transport strategy.
Yes, thank you. I thought it was legitimate to do so, particularly as this is in the Kent Downs national landscape, which I represent among other national landscapes. Yeah.
Sorry. Matt?
Thank you. Well, as a borough council leader for the area where Bluebell Hill is, we've got a slightly different perspective from the Kent Downs national landscape, which isn't a particular surprise. I think part of the problem with this consultation is that KCC are talking about something that might happen in 5 years' time. So there's uncertainty straight away about whether this will happen or not. If this does happen in 5 years' time, then the Lower Thames crossing should be built by that point. And I think part of the reason that we're having this consultation now is because National Highways and Kent County Council, in my opinion, have never quite got to the bottom of what to do about the impact at the top of Bluebell Hill in particular from the additional vehicles that will be using that stretch of road coming through the Lower Thames crossing and then heading down Bluebell Hill to go from the M2 to the M20. So they absolutely have to do something. This is a decent solution of doing that, and I think our consultation response as a subnational transport body is very fair from that perspective. I note that there's in our response we do talk about the footpath, which I think is a generous use of the word footpath, that goes from Common Road down to Kitts Coty at Salisbury Road. And without getting into the weeds of that footpath, if we are to support the upgrades to that footpath that supports the modal shift, then can we include something in the response about retaining the bus stop on Bluebell Hill southbound at the junction with Salisbury Road, which is well used by the 101 bus. But this is quite critical because under the current plans, they actually take that out, KCC. Frankly, if we want to get people on the bus, we need to keep some bus stops there. I can provide the details of the precise bus stop to Rupert or whichever officer is needed, but I would hope that the body would support what Tunbridge and Moorland have said in saying that the retention of a bus stop is quite critical to this if we want people to use public transport and for all the buses to get through here as quickly as I hope the cars will.
I'll come to Rupert. I still think it's the Kent's response that we are responding to. So,
I think we can put something in about a broader point about public transport and, you know, maintaining public transport links, you know, either where they exist or looking in the same way that we reckon we want, enhancements to crossings and footpaths, I think we can say the same around public transport provision. And we can put a line in around that. Rather than getting into the detail of an individual bus and a bus stop, I think for us it's more appropriate to talk about enhancing or maintaining the public transport links, which are clearly very important.
I won't labour the point, but we do reference specific footpaths and specific footbridges in our responses, page 36 of the agenda pack. So we'll essentially, all I'm asking is that we include at the end of that sentence about bus stops in particular. You're all welcome to come to the Bluebell Hill bus stop if you all want to. It's an open invite to see how important it is. But yes, that would be helpful if we could.
We'll put something appropriate in.
You have assurances that your voice has been heard. Any other point? Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of broad points, if that's okay, the two different topics, but one on the integrated transport strategy, call for a response from TFSE. Just check the timing of this report in relation to the roadshows, TFSE roadshow that came to Brighton on the 5th of February, and then, I know not the same, but Department for Transport event also in Brighton for the region on the 27th of February. Just want to connect how this report sits within the context of the timing around those two events. I do have a second question which relates to EVs. Do you want to come back to that question?
Go for it. Do you want to ask the second question, or you want to wait for the other one?
Yes, I can. Just get the right page again. One moment. I've got pages here. So it's in the EV report, the reference to BEVs and the vans in particular. And perhaps a particular question I had is really just to check on how this fits within your thinking. So question 15 is quite specific, sorry. Are there other flexibilities that should be considered within VETs for cars and vans? And no for cars and yes for vans. And I just, it's helpful to get that feedback in terms of that. But I always want to think about whether there's a mechanism for trading in old vans and how that compares with trading for a scrappage scheme or whatever you want to call it for cars. And are we incentivising the private car and not the private van? Or how's it sitting? Are we driving both together? Or is one going a different stream to another? I'd like to think both can progress well within this, but I want to understand how this fits within this approach.
Thank you. Rupert?
Yeah. So I might ask Mark to come in on the electric vehicles one. On the integrated national transport strategy, so this is almost like an ongoing conversation. So this is the specific response to their consultation. In addition to which, we've had the roadshow in Brighton and a series of other events, both locally or regionally and nationally, where the INTS team has come out, ministers have come out and talking about their ambitions for an integrated national transport strategy. The key for us is ensuring that our strategy reflects the ambitions that the Secretary of State is setting out in their integrated national transport strategy. The expectation, I think, is that it's not going to be this, huge tome of work. It is going to be a relatively high-level strategy that starts to sort of bind together, the challenges around road, rail, and different modes, and that the regional transport strategies that we produce and we use to provide advice to the Secretary of State chime with the integrated national transport strategy, so that we find ourselves in step. So the question about the timing of various events, the questionnaire and the roadshow, it's really about the Secretary of State getting her intent behind the integrated national strategy out to a range of stakeholders. And you probably saw at the Brighton event there was quite a collection of really quite different users, different mode interests and the like, that I know that the INTS team just wanted to get a sense of. So our response is really about how we chime the regional strategies and our ultimately our strategic investment plan with what's coming out of the Integrated National Transport Strategy.
May I come back on one point stemming from that very helpful event in Brighton? I have to say it was very well done, and I thank the organisers for making that such an engaging session, well attended, and some really good feedback, I imagine, coming from that. One of the feedbacks I've had since within the Transport and Travel Partnership I chair in Brighton and Hove is within, and I guess it's to do with scale. And in some ways, it may be appropriate to stick this in the local authority context, but it's a feedback that I've had from pedestrian groups and pedestrian activists who were saying, you know, how does the voice of the pedestrian in particular, and also perhaps linked to accessibility charities as well within this context, how do they, although there's a much smaller scale distances involved, how does it fit within the regional strategy? I think that's something they're keen to feedback.
So I think, you know, part of the, and this is fine line, isn't it? And when we have conversations with my officer equivalents in local transport authorities, you know, the role of an STB is not to do LC whips in the local area. That is it's a LTA issue. But we've got the regional active travel work on the agenda a bit later on. Is to try and set, you know, a sort of higher level, more of a strategic approach to it, but recognising that, you know, walking, cycling, and those, you know, modes within local transport authority areas are best led by the local transport authorities through their LC whips, and anything that we can do to support them in delivering their ambitions, I think, is appropriate. The other point that I think is quite interesting since the roadshow is, of course, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is now out, and I think there's two aspects to that. One is around nationally significant infrastructure projects, but the other bit, and of more interest to us around the room, is spatial development strategies, and how at a sub-regional level planning and spatial planning is, you know, the intent of the bill is to take that spatial planning, and I think that provides opportunities around, you know, the infrastructure that's required to support really good quality development, be that housing or retail or commercial. And there's an opportunity for that spatial development strategy to signpost. Again, I don't expect it to go into a lot of detail because there'll still be local plans that exist, but be able to help prioritise what's important to make for really good quality development in the right locations.
Thank you. Mark, Evie?
Yes, so coming back on the point about the second-hand market in vans, yes, I think this was quite a technical consultation document about some of the nuances of the way that the transition is going to work, quite a lot of technical detail, but on the basic point about the second-hand market, both in for cars and for vans, is going to be very important as part of that transition. I suppose that the difference with the fleets, particularly thinking about commercial fleets and vans, so many operators are large-scale operators who buy from new. They're not into a second-hand market, but the stock that they then have, you know, the ability for that to be sold on to other van operators is going to be an important part, I think, of the transition of getting us to where we need to be by 2050.
And that's really helpful, and I fully agree. So my question is there any form of emphasis on scrappage or trading in? Because I think the key to a lot of the small businesses, perhaps in Brighton and Hove, for instance, is to get that transition is the availability of the second-hand market. We see the big distributor moving to EV, so there presumably will be second-hand vans coming onto the market within a reasonable timeline. But there may still be some barriers, maybe it's related to cost or charging facility. And so what mechanism can we do outside London to enable that within that?
Yeah, I think that, yes, I mean, I think that needs further consideration as to exactly how that market is going to work and the financial incentives that there may be to assist with the transition. I think, you know, the general mood music with the EV transition is the government is looking for the market to lead this process. So the idea of large-scale subsidies for, you know, the transition both for cars and particularly vans But obviously there is this issue, particularly when you get into the heavier end of the market, about the capital cost of these vehicles, because you know, the technology is still evolving, but the cost of, you know, like replacement for a combustion engine lorry to an electric lorry is still quite prohibitive. So I think there is that recognition that sort of some market incentives might need to be introduced to ensure that those people who are looking to transition the fleet have some assistance in doing that, to make sure that the market starts moving, and the second-hand market that you sort of said is so important, that also is generated. So some priming money may be needed to make that happen.
Thank you. I've got John now. Is it still on that last point? Yeah. Okay, so please then.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the market like and developments for the conversion? So where diesel engines, for example, are replaced with electric, because we've seen it with buses, it can be done, and I'm just wondering if that might be another avenue to explore as to how those developments are coming on.
Yeah, that's not.
That's a different way of doing it.
I must say I'm not that au fait with the sort of the mechanism, but that's not something that I've certainly seen come through as a strong theme in the sort of the thinking about taking, you know, a sort of a one form, particularly for vans, taking a diesel van and then retrofitting, shall we say, the battery technology into it, because they work in such a different way. Now, I think when you move to potentially larger vehicles, the opportunities to do that for heavy goods vehicles may be more, it may be an easier transition to make, but there isn't, as I've seen, that isn't sort of part of the recognised pathway at the moment. It's coming strongly through in the thinking about what we're going to be about is converting combustion engine vehicles to battery by changing some aspect of the body.
Is it something we can keep an eye on?
We can keep an eye on it.
That would be great. Thank you. Joy, I'm pushing it over across.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on EVs as well. So I had a number of points. Firstly, if we talk about vans, are we talking generally about vans? Because I noticed some of the points here about, you know, there's an issue with the size of vans, etc., but there are different sizes of vans, and some of them are very similar size to large 4x4s. They'll fit in bays. So I just wondered whether we should make reference to the different types of vans there are, because I know that a lot of what I call smaller van fleets, they are looking for their employees to they take them home anyway, and they'd want them to charge at home. And I know I'm certainly exploring that with some of my fleet at the moment. Okay. Yeah. So I think it's important, because otherwise we're being too general about vans in per se. Mm-hmm. And then obviously that then refers me back to the national picture. And also, you know, the ability for residents to charge themselves. If nationally and also locally we haven't caught up with potential demand, would we still insist on a 2030? And I'm thinking nationally, probably more than anything, whether there'll actually be enough electricity to feed everybody. Because that's a real concern, because it's delayed me by 18 months from putting it into one depot. Yep. You know, 150 to 50 cars, 50 vans, sorry. So that's a real issue. And then I just lastly comment, yes, I also on the local transport one had an issue regarding pedestrian context, but I was going to bring that up in the active travel strategy.
I think we've noted those points. I don't know. I don't think we have all the answers. No, I know. But is there anything you want to come back on, Mark? No. Okay. Thank you. John, your question.
Thank you. My John Ennis, I'm Lead Councillor Climate Strategy and Transport Reading. Share the frustrations, by the way, about EV, because grid capacity is a major issue for development amongst anything else. But the points I want to make in an end question is number 2, is the draft response to the Transport Strategy for rail investment. I think there's real opportunities. I really agree with a lot. I agree with the consultation and the points. I think they're really accurate as far as locally ourselves. But it's frustrations and opportunities, because, I mean, our town, Reading, has got 8 stations. 8 stations, and they can be connected in. It's a really good connection, and it's on a national, regional line as well. Yeah. And we acknowledge we can't act in isolation. We want to do a ticketing, integrated ticketing with buses, with transport, We can't act in isolation. We can certainly act regionally. And the question is if we could do that, but look at a regional position, because I think the real transformation, certainly for a town like Reading, we're doing a lot on the buses, but a lot of people don't want to use the bus. There's still that reticence, to be frank. Some of us are bus lovers, but the train is a different kind of fish. But if you're charging, and you're delayed, by the way, sorry I'm late, but you know, I'm always late, but I will blame the train. But you know, it's that little frustration and obstacles, and I think the points are right, is how we can do a regional approach to push this, to get integration, certainly from a regional perspective, which we can do in the southeast because the network's there. And I was going to ask a question about how the progress is, because it seems to be, I don't know, it seems to be lots of promise. Because I think we need to move. I think it'd be great to push to move on this. And ultimately, the pricing is going to be everything, the timing and the pricing. So I just wonder what if there's a level of optimism on this consultation. I hope so. Thank you.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right with the optimism, and I think you're actually right to recognise that the problems change daily and that they are there. But I actually believe that working as we are currently, we stand far more of a chance to influence what goes on nationally, and therefore, hopefully, we will have some more major successes. And we've had several along the way, and I'm sure we can hold Reading and the buses up as a good example. Nothing to do with us, but you know, we recognise the potential there for others. And if you look at some of our mass transit stuff that exists in the SIP and in the strategy, you know, it's really enhanced by what you're doing in Reading. So I guess my message to you is don't think we're going to do it all in a day, but just collectively making the points you do and keep coming along, you know, collectively we might get there. So let's remain positive. Very lucky to have a Rolls Royce. Oh, sorry, no, you have Rolls Royce in your patch. So,
and I know that they're not a small volume manufacturer because they're above the 2499 registrations, but obviously I'm thinking about export. This wouldn't impact export production, would it?
everyone's looking at this.
Because obviously there's a significant amount of their cars are exported.
They do.
Rather than UK registration, so they would actually be exported prior to registration. So would they therefore be categorised as a small volume manufacturer?
That's a really interesting question. I'd be surprised if you class Rolls as a small manufacturer, given the broader company position. I mean, I think...
It does say per registrations, though.
Yeah, I don't know, Joy. It's a simple answer.
Just a thought.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question, though. I will see if I can find out.
Another question that needs answering.
Can I come back to trains?
Yes, please, Lou.
If you don't mind. Is there any way of including an additional area in this paper? Because what about performance? Is there any way that we could... OK, we're all smiling about this. You just raised it. You know, could that be a role that TFSC could have by monitoring performance and feeding back into the franchises and to GBR, etc.? You know, if we could get more people on trains and buses, I think that would be a fantastic move. And we could include another response, another line in that response.
Capacity as well.
Capacity, yeah.
As well.
I mean, how many of us have sat on trains on the floor or stood up for the entire journey?
Or being scrunched.
Yeah, because there's only 6 carriages where there should be 12. And they're very nice at, you know, South West Rail.
You set some very interesting questions, so thank you for that. Ruth.
Could we?
So I think, I think the shorthand is that potential is there. I think there's 2 strands to it. The first is we've got a paper coming on later on the agenda about the South East Rail Partnership. So this is not just about what we can do as a region with 16 local transport authorities as a voice to government, but what we can do as the sort of ring donut around London with England's economic heartland and Transport East adding their voice, because some of the issues that they face around performance, around things like the freight movements, integrated ticketing, you know, they're common issues. And if you've got 3 subnational transport bodies talking to government on these issues, it's very powerful. And we found that working with GBR, Great British Railways, and the transition team has been quite helpful in making sure that the voice that you have spoken with around this table, and Economic Heartland and the others, gets heard by GBR as it goes into, you know, formulating how it will work. I guess the other aspect is in the consultations on devolution at the moment, so that's applicable in the main to Hampshire, either Whitehall, Southampton, to the Sussexes and Brighton, and to Surrey. There is specific reference for rail in it, and it talks about, okay, this is a way off, I think, because you're talking about strategic authorities once you've been established for a while, but there is a statutory role that they refer to in governing, managing and planning the rail network. And I think, you know, the subnational transport bodies can help a mayor with the evidence make the case. And so each of the mayors, you know, will have a seat around the Nations and Regions Council. You know, you've got an STB that is providing really top-notch, Daniel, thank you for your comment earlier on, evidence. And I think, you know, those mayoral combined authorities can use that evidence. And local transport authorities, whilst they're on their journey to devolution, can also use that evidence. So, you know, we bring together, in a future world, potentially, you know, 3 mayors and the leaders of the local transport authorities that are not progressing with the devolution approach at the moment. So I think depends what the consultation says, but performance is in there as well. And, you know, we too have made the point at the wider South East Rail Partnership around issues on performance and how, as GBR starts to become established, how they take account of, you know, the local voice, if you like, or the regional voice, you know, in terms of local authority leaders and mayors. That's still, you know, a work in progress in that, you know, draft legislation is just coming out.
We know.
But we have a good relationship with the department and they understand our ambitions, and I think there's real power in 3 SDBs coming together.
And I think it's an ideal role, really, for TFSE, you know, going forward, because a lot of, as you say, under the mayoral authority, you know, it's one of the 9 work streams, isn't it? It's about integrated transport and strategic planning for transport. And in there could be the role for TFSE with rail and you know, I think it's time to start building that in now, I would say.
And I think it's fair to say that the DFT, in some of the, you know, the policy positioning, Dan might wish to comment on this, is setting out the role of STBs quite clearly, in my mind, in the new governance, local governance arrangements. And, you know, it's recognising that in relation to road and rail, you know, STBs have that strategic role to play in the way that you've just described. And it, you know, very much about the evidence base. So things like the Common Analytical Framework and the evidence behind the strategies and the Centre of Excellence work, all is about putting both combined authorities and local authorities in the best possible place with the evidence to enable you to make really sound decisions, and the evidence to help you take your business cases forward. And I see that for both road and an increasing role in relation to rail. I mean, Dan might wish to add on.
Oh dear, I've opened a can of worms.
Yeah, I know. Good.
Oh, that one. That was like a little light, you know. Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's nothing that I can say that definitive at the moment because there's still quite a lot of sort of that policy definition working out, particularly with us approaching the spending review. But I mean, I think I'd just echo what Rupert said about the power of working together, particularly the South East Rail Partnership model. I think is a really good one, and it's a really good way of trying to have a structured conversation on a topic where there is quite a lot moving around at the moment. You know, you'll see it with Great British Railways forming and the sort of department's position as well. So I think it's a really good strategy, and working about how make it so that it's clear that this is the voice of the representative authorities, not just of an STB, but this is in fact the sort of collective view, and that the South East Rail Partnership is a good model for that. So I definitely encourage that in terms of the generalities, and then the specifics about performance, whatever that you've mentioned, could be picked up through that. So.
Okay. Do you want to come in at any point?
Daniel.
Thank you. Just a quick point. It's in response to how the responses have been drafted, in light of some of the conversation there, the emphasis or the focus on end-to-end journeys, whether it's for people or for boxes, doesn't necessarily come through as strong as I think it could. And I think that is actually where TFSE as a subnational transport body has an incredibly important role to play, because inevitably GBR are going to be focusing on rail, National Highways will persist in focusing on highways, and if we are going to get end-to-end journeys to be considered at a strategic level and that to percolate down in planning, then we've got to change the way we do almost everything. And inevitably, those that are focusing on a particular part of the jigsaw puzzle are going to find it easier to persist in focusing on that part of the jigsaw puzzle. So it requires an organisation with a decent amount of clout, hopefully the STBs, to provide that distraction from being too parochial, and planning to integrate modes, planning to ensure that you can get from A to B in as efficient a way as possible, in an almost kind of modal agnostic manner. So if that doesn't come out to others in the draft responses, then I would put in a vote for trying to emphasise that as being part of our role.
Thank you for that. I think that's been heard. Yeah, we can adopt and adapt that. Is the what's on our screen there on the screen, or do I need to read all of those recommendations out?
You don't need to read them.
Okay. I'm just thinking of the people that are viewing this, but if they've seen it, that's great. We did, taking on board what was suggested about the additional recommendation, are we going to...
Yeah, so I'll find out. I will find out. I might have a further conversation with Joy about roles, but we'll have a bit of digging around that. I think the point about performance is well made. It might be other companies. Yeah. Yeah. We'll look at the point that was made around performance and embellish that a bit. And then the point that Daniel's making about end-to-end journeys, I think, is a key one as well. So we'll look at just incorporating that.
Okay. Is there any other points anyone want to raise? No? Thank you for that. That was really useful. So we will agree the responses as or recommendations as printed with the additional bits that Rupert's just run through. So thank you for that. We now move on to agenda item 8, which is business planning, and Keir, I think you're going to introduce that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is quite good news, actually. The board will remember, I think in previous years, TFSE's funding settlement has came a few months into the financial year, but we're happy to say that the Transport Secretary has already signed off our business plan for next year and awarded our funding for next year, which is really good news. And we've attached the Transport Secretary's letter to Transport for the South East as Appendix 1. And as she sets out in the letter, I think it's in recognition of all the work we're doing to support the government's missions and local authorities to deliver. So I think that's really strong. It shows that the business plan has resonated, but also just all the work TFSE are doing. But as it does say in the letter, we have actually got a slight increase in funding than we originally profiled the business plan for. So we've got an extra £96,666. And because of that, we have to then allocate that additional money to extra work. And the Department for Transport expressed a preference that we allocate it to the Centre of Excellence and Analytical Framework. I think because that work that we've done on that has really resonated with officials and the Transport Secretary. So in the paper and in the updated business plan, we've suggested putting it to those areas. So for the Centre of Excellence specifically, that means extra work on buses and particularly helping local authorities with the impacts of devolution and the new kind of models for managing buses in their area that might come out as part of that. And then on Analytical Framework, there's extra work to procure freight movement data, which again, we then share with our local authorities to help them make informed decisions in this area. So they're the main changes in the business plan, and we've also updated it just to include the Transport Secretary's steer on the areas that TFSE should focus on. So that was all about delivering a pan-regional approach, focusing on pan-regional connectivity and integration, and supporting local authorities' capacity and capability. So yeah, they're the two updates that we'd need the board to approve.
Thank you. And I think it's really pleasing that we got our settlement so early and are able to make this planning ahead of the spend, which is to be commended. And thank you very much for all the help that I know went on behind the scenes, and sets out some clear steer as where we need to go. And I think a really clear acknowledgement of what Transport and South East has actually delivered. So keep going at this rate. We'll be doing okay. Comments or questions? Trevor.
Thank you. That's a very helpful summary. Appreciate that. Just clarification about the uplift in funding, which is very positive and welcomed. In reference to bus services, is that specifically or inclusive of governance model evaluation, re-evaluation of governance model? Is that for that purpose, or is it just looking at level of service and how to improve within that context?
Do you want to?
Yeah, happy to. So it'll be delivered through the Centre of Excellence, and its purpose of is it will be training to help local authority officers advise local authority members going forward. But you're right, it's more about the governance and how the bus systems are run. So we know local authorities might get more powers in this area in terms of enhanced partnerships, or I heard someone call them enhanced partnerships, or you can move to a full franchising model. So there'll be new powers, potentially new funding that the Department for Transport have announced. But this will be basically giving officers advice on what all those governance models mean and the advantages and disadvantages of all of them. So we know that the DFT have a bus centre of excellence which cover the whole country. But a lot of these models, I think it's the first time they're going to be introduced in the South East, so they'll be new to officers. So it will be specifically training on what it means and how to implement them.
Joy.
I don't know. Is Councillor Mullins suggesting that potentially the money be used to help consider looking at bus franchising? I presume that's what your thoughts are.
Thank you. It's a general open question, not pushing one agenda over another. I just wanted clarification. As you say, Centre of Excellence money is to, perhaps to train officers, should that be an option. So I'm not advocating one thing or another within this question, but I do think it's a clarification whether that's the focus for the money. That's really the question.
Okay. I suppose the reason being is that I would have thought as we move towards, I know for some of us, towards a mayoral devolution perspective, that will probably be more for the mayoral office to consider.
Yeah.
So it might be just worth adding in terms of the current consultation on devolution prize programme, correct? From franchising through to enhanced partnerships and so on. I think the key for the Centre of Excellence is to provide evidence, analytical support and advice to officers in local authority areas, be that combined authority or local transport authorities, to help them best make whatever case is appropriate for their local area. And I think that's the key here. So, the franchising debate has long been had. There are areas in which it works. There are areas in which, for it to work, you need lots of money. And it's, getting that balance and providing the tools and advice and expertise. And it's not just from STBs. What we can also do is convene. So we can bring in, operators, DFT policy officials and others to make sure that, in putting together a case or helping officers put together a case back at the ranch, you've got the good evidence and good advice to go for.
Trevor.
I'll come back to Councillor Dennis's question or theme. And I hear that point. It's up to the potential mayoral authority, as that progresses, to consider that at scale, or it may be a unitary authority, should they wish. And I guess this Centre of Excellence resource will be available to both unitary and devolved mayoral authorities.
And it will specifically, I think, look at it in those different contexts, because we recognise, like Rupert said, some authorities are on that devolution kind of fast track, some aren't. So we need to provide advice and evidence on how to use, what to do in different contexts.
Okay. Thank you. The recommendations on the screen, and if we could just change the update business plan for 25 to 26 as opposed to 16, that would be good. following the announcement of the government's funding. Thank you very much. Sorry. I just thought it'd be, just to be clear. Excellent. Are we all in favour of that? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So we now come to warehousing and waterborne freight viability studies. Mark, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to ask the members of the board to agree both the warehousing provision and viability of waterborne freight studies. So the rationale for undertaking these two pieces of work goes back to the TFSE Freight Logistics and Gateway Strategy that the board agreed in January 2022. So just obviously two studies to consider here, but just looking at the warehousing study in particular, unsurprisingly, the main objective for this study was to assess the current and future quantity of warehousing demand that's likely to manifest itself in the southeast, analyse whether the current and future stock is sufficient, and particularly try and identify where more provision might be required. Just to emphasise, as part of the work that was undertaken, there were a number of discussions held with key stakeholders who helped shape the overall report. In terms of some of the key findings of the warehousing study, unsurprisingly, the majority of the warehousing stock, 84% of the warehousing stock in the region, located near to the main strategic and major route network. But an interesting piece of finding, sort of using a rating system, a recognised rating system, that 91% of the stock that's available being identified as being of either average or poor quality. So the study found that there is currently an excess of demand over supply, and one kind of key issue is sort of the planning system and how that continues to make provision for warehousing as we move into the future, given its importance to the freight and logistics sector. So in terms of some recommendations from the report, better, more proactive strategic planning is required to ensure that we get the level of warehousing provision that we need. And that's through better coordination between local planning authorities, the government importantly strengthening planning policy and guidance to ensure that warehousing gets the consideration that it needs, exploring alternative methods for calculating warehousing need. How do we go about actually identifying what's needed, and better sort of a provision of data to make sure that we've got the data that we need to do the analysis to sort of to make the case. So as a next step on the warehousing study, we'll be sharing this obviously with government and our local authority partners. Now moving on to the waterborne study, the objectives of this were to undertake an evaluation of the viability of integrating short sea shipping and inland waterways into freight transport into the southeast to reduce carbon emissions, mitigate congestion on the road network, and also look to stimulate growth in our coastal towns, and also to identify the challenges and opportunities and constraints that using waterborne freight may present. Again, good stakeholder engagement through this study to help inform its development and outcomes. So in terms of some key findings from this study, there is a significant volume of sort of bulk goods, particularly aggregates, metals and petroleum, moving around in the southeast, which could, in theory, be transferred to waterborne freight, particularly because of its bulk and obviously the need for its less urgent delivery. There were some locations identified in the southeast where there is the potential for an increase in waterborne freight, particularly in the, unsurprisingly, in the Isle of Wight and Solent areas, around Southampton Port, and also where TFSE, the interface between the TFSE area and the Port of London Authority. However, there are significant challenges expanding short sea shipping, as most ports have a specialism in terms of the type of cargo that they handle. And we would need to sort of change and diversify the offer that each port made in terms of its ability to receive different types of goods. Also, again, this issue which comes up often sort of when we're talking about freight, lack of relevant data, so the ability to have data sets that enable us to understand what is going on. So overall, it hasn't been possible to demonstrate that increasing the volume of waterborne freight in the TFC area is a kind of financially viable operation, but obviously something that we need to keep under review. So in terms of the overall conclusions from the paper, these two pieces of work have been undertaken to further our understanding of the freight sector. They were two elements of work that came out of the freight logistics and gateway strategy, and members of the board are asked to agree both of those reports on those two studies.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Daniel, and then I'll come to
So, a couple of questions. A really interesting piece of work, first of all. The first question is, what might we do next, or what would you recommend? Because there isn't a recommendation as such for further work here. But presume there were some ideas of what we could do usefully.
Yes, I think the first thing that, as we sort of said, what we're anxious to do is just have a conversation with the DFT about the study and how we could take forward some of the recommendations, particularly given sort of the partnership and the fact that we have planning authorities involved. What would need to happen, given there's been the recent changes to the national policy planning framework that place more emphasis on warehousing, but what does that actually mean in practice? So one of the things that we're actually exploring through our freight awareness work is to, as a separate sort of work stream to this, but that's covered off in the technical paper, is to then look as to what needs to happen to enable local planning authority officers to think or have the information available to them to be able to make the case, shall we say, for warehousing when local plans are being formed. So that's an example of one of the things that we are looking to actively do, is to sort of enable better informed decisions.
So that sort of links to my second question, which is a bigger one and more abstract, and I apologise for it. But nevertheless, here goes. This sounds like, or it feels like this is a case of we wouldn't be doing what we're doing now if we were able to do something different without any effort. And the challenge always is where do you need to apply the incentives to make a step change? And how can you coordinate so that you can build up momentum rapidly enough? So that's what I said, it was abstract. Are we in a position yet, or could we get into a position where we can make recommendations for where investment would need to be made, or where policy change might be helpful, or other kind of interventions might be helpful to get to the point where we really could exploit the opportunity that short sea shipping represents instinctively?
Yeah. I think to answer the question simply, the main issue that we've got here is about data, as I said, is that in order to, as you know, TFC being an evidence-led sort of approach to things, the thing that we lack as in many contexts when we look at freight is the ability to get the data that we need to answer the questions that we might want to pose. And that's just a universal issue.
It becomes, sorry to interrupt, it becomes a paradox, doesn't it? Because actually it's the old iPhone thing. You don't know you really want one until you've had one for ages. So is part of that data collection exercise asking people what, if it was in the realms of possibility, they might really like and might exploit, with a view to then building up enough of a consensus, kind of a critical mass to be able to make something happen?
I think the answer to the question is the data is available, but we're not. It's commercially, obviously, as we've looked, it's commercial. We're into a commercial market here, and the data is available. It's about how can the sort of the conundrum is how could we access that data in a way that it's anonymised, such that we're not at risk of interfering with the commercial nature of the market. So that's an issue that is there for the
so my last point then is it sounds like it's very difficult, but of course if it was easy, people would do it. And again, if we can help move something forward that is difficult, that really justifies our existence yet again. Thank you.
Joy.
Yes, I read it with considerable interest, actually. It was really fascinating. I did think that it was really useful for the Ds and Bs as well, in terms of, from a planning perspective, getting a real feel for what is needed necessarily in their areas, and obviously with devolution from a much wider perspective. I do have a vision that, you know, we'll go along all our major roads and there'll just be a series of warehouses on either side, and all we'll see as we travel in warehouses. Just seem to be feeling that way these days, especially when you go up the M1. I suppose from the waterborne piece, I did wonder why we looked at some of the really small ones, because it was fairly obvious that they were marine and leisure now. You know, things had moved on so so far on in the last 40 to 50 years that they were no longer doing anything really commercial of any interest. So why bother looking at them? Because there is no infrastructure available, or any possibility of infrastructure available for them to be even considered for commercial movement. I could give a few examples, but I'm sure you'll know some of the ones I mean.
As someone who has a small port in his patch, I agree with some of the point you make, but actually when the roads are jam-packed and rails not working, and we may need to be looking at waterborne. So it's, I would always rule nothing in, nothing out, but you never know. What do they say about it? If we keep looking, we might find the ultimate answer to all of it, but who knows? Dan.
Yeah, just a quick point. This is sort of followed on from the conversation you and Daniel just had, but just in terms of interaction with the department, it was really whether you either had any input from the freight teams or whether you have got any contacts or would like any that can help you follow up both some of the specifics of this and perhaps also some of the general points around freight strategy. Because if you need some a link in, we can help you with that.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I've got Trevor joining, and then I'll come over to you, Tim. Sorry.
Great, thank you. The connectivity with this is a great thing to open up, and I think perhaps picking up on Daniel's point, you know, what we're trying to achieve in the longer term, what we're trying to induce with this. We have two ports, as Keith referenced, one of them on our doorstep to the east, which is a very good rail link, presently owned by the French, and another one to the west in Shoreham, which is trying to do innovative approaches to its transport, so EVs and hydrogen, etc., within the approach to lower carbon transport. And so what we're trying to drive the change with, where we put these warehouses reference a lot to motorways, but if we put all the warehouses on motorways, then we're going to induce more road transport. And do we want to encourage the use of more rail freight, and therefore warehouses associated with good railway sidings, etc., and then connect those to the ports, as Newhaven is, and potentially Shoreham could be better connected to the rail system. And what we're trying to envisage for the future within this.
Just on the rail, there is the you see in the technical update paper, we have a piece of work ongoing to look at the intermodal freight. So the government's target of increasing the amount of freight on the rail network by 75%. Trying to answer the question, what does that look like in our region? In terms of the key thing here being another land use, which is the rail freight interchanges. So, you know, yes, you can get the pathways on the rail network, but we need the interchange facilities to enable that transfer to take place. But you're absolutely right, we do have a number of our ports which are very well connected on the railway network, which there is the potential then to increase the amount of freight going through there. So, if you like, we've got a sort of separate piece of work ongoing to look at that, which incorporates the issue that you've raised.
Actually, I'll make 2 points. I do a follow-up from my fellow councillors regarding one of those points, which is Shoreham, where actually it's a point in you know, as I made, you know, most of that commercial activity or area around the port has already gone to residential, or it's about to go to residential, so there's very little left and very little opportunity around it, which potentially could have been quite useful in the past. But I do like the idea of more space around rail freight, rail sidings. I totally agree with you on that. I think it makes far more sense. And to that extent, I just wanted to completely sort of slightly off this, but you know, the fact that you're talking about warehouse provision for the future, I think is brilliant, because it's a shame that when people are looking at local plans, for example, that they're not looking at provision for bus provision as well in terms of bus garages, bus stations, etc., bus garaging, because doesn't seem to be any facilities being developed in local plans anywhere for those particular provisions, particularly as things have changed through the years and they want to move them away necessarily from city centres and to the outskirts, and yet there's no provisions for those in any of the local plans that I look at. Thank you.
Tim, and I'll come across.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Otherwise, Tim will think I've got something against.
Thank you. One planning authority that is missing from this study is, unless I missed it, in what is a very thorough and lengthy study, is of course ours, the South Downs National Park Authority, which is a large planning authority, and in a way I suppose we might take comfort from that, in the sense that it doesn't suggest that anybody is looking to us to make major provision in this direction. Though of course some of the other authorities do lie in the periphery of our space. But we did also notice that I think all of the majority of the property market areas which are deemed to have insufficient provision do have protected landscapes within them. So possibly one of the reasons why they haven't got sufficient provision is that they have got to work around protected landscapes, and the more so in the light of the Section 245 of the Lura Act, which requires all public authorities to have regard to the purposes of protected landscapes. So I wanted to flag that factor because there may be some bad reasons why some of these areas don't measure up, but we would want to argue that the presence of protected landscapes is a good reason. So this is an issue not explored in this report, and I'm not complaining about that, but I think a one-size-fits-all does need to be modified to take account of the fact that given the presence of protected landscapes, there isn't always the scope to provide on the scale that might otherwise be desirable.
So can I just make a quick comment on that? Which I wish the planning inspectors would understand that too.
Yeah, quite. Which leads me neatly onto devolution, actually, and how strategic planning is going to be part of, the mayor's role. And this piece of work, which I think is great, I think we're all quite excited to see this piece of work. I think this will be quite an important part of that strategic planning, looking at a much bigger picture of how warehousing, freight, etc., can be improved going forward. As a minor point, we have a new Amazon distribution centre, and unfortunately, although it's on an old industrial site, which was part of Lee Park, large housing estate, it's not as accepted as the more industrial elements of what used to be there. That makes sense. Because of the amount of movement of the vehicles. And it employs quite a lot of local people, but it's that impact that people perceive it having on their local roads. So where you put distribution centres and warehousing is really key because of the impact on, not in my backyard, to residents. So again, it takes it back to planning, local plans, but for me, going forward, it's about, strategic authorities and the mayor having that overall plan for an area. So, thank you.
Matt.
Very interesting discussion, this. We've had some success in Kent around provision of multinational companies in large warehouses next motorways effectively. And we haven't had the kickback for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's not housing. Secondly, they are generally employing local people en masse. And third, there's a realisation that actually the way that societal trends are going is that actually we are reliant, and the brands in which we are spending our money with generally are needing this floor space. and they need it in an accessible location, and usually next to motorways are where they should be. So there's no particular problem. You can drive down the M20 from probably junction 4 to junction 8 at the moment, and it's literally one after another, after another, after another. So I just think it's a fact of life, and I think the study, when I read it, was quite fair about the way that the economy's going, whether we like it or not at the moment. So I actually thought it was a very, very good piece of work. I thought it was very realistic about where we are at the moment, and I think it identified that, yes, there are issues around bus depots and there are issues around rail connections that are definitely worth looking into, but at the end of the day, this is a great way in which to have really quite localised economic growth, but on a national footprint, given who's occupying them.
Thank you. No other comments or questions?
Just a quick one on that one. I don't disagree with your comments. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how people would think if we bulldozed down their high streets and put a warehouse in, if that's their way their shopping's going.
I don't think we'll go there today, if that's all right. Anything you want to add, Mark? Okay, so we're again asked to agree the study reports for warehousing provision and waterborne freight studies. So are we happy to do that? Yeah. Again, a great conversation, so thank you for that. You're staying, Mark, for the wider South East Rail Partnership position, please.
Yes, so the purpose of this paper is to ask board members to comment on the contents of a position paper that's been developed for the wider South East Rail Partnership. So the partnership itself has been established in recognition of the need to provide a unified pan-regional voice for the rail needs of the wider South East. It consists of, just so everyone's clear, Transport for the South East, England's Economic Heart and Transport East, Great British Railways Transition Team, Transport for London, Network Rail and the Department for Transport. So the purpose of the position paper to sort of guide the activities of the partnership, ensure that each of the STBs are able to deliver their visions, ensure that the needs of the rail passengers across the wider South East are met, and importantly, to take account of the future role of new strategic authorities as they emerge across the wider South East. So trying to anticipate what might happen with devolution. So in terms of some of the objectives set out in the paper, obviously in the position paper, it's about us articulating our investment priorities and to secure funding for rail investment in the area, enhancing integration across modes. So how does the rail network integrate with other modes, and particularly obviously across existing boundaries. Promoting rail freight growth and advancing the sort of the net zero agenda amongst others, and there's other objectives which are set out in the paper. In terms of some of the delivery actions, obviously the major reason for the partnership coming together to encourage collaboration between the STBs, aligning our evidence bases with the other partners in the partnership, ensuring that the wider South East Rail Network supports the implementation of the government's evolving integrated national transport strategy, and working with the other partners to address national and cross-boundary rail travel opportunities. And importantly, through this partnership, to provide formal advice to the Secretary of State about the rail priorities in our geography, as well as a sort of objective to provide regular updates to stakeholders. So just in terms of since the paper was drafted, just to note that we did have a very good discussion with this at our senior officer group. So there are some additional items that we want to introduce into the paper, which is about just the emphasis. Obviously, the emphasis of the existing paper is about investment in new infrastructure, but just making the point that we also want to encourage better use of existing rail infrastructure, including more specific information about freight integration with London, and also more explicit reference to the importance of linkages to airports in the region. So those points will be brought in to a revised version of the paper that we will then circulate to the other partners.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Again, an awful lot of information in there. Is it, and it's probably an unfair question, but is it as positively received in the other 3 areas as it is in
Oh, absolutely,
TFC?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Sometimes you create these things without knowing just how interested other people are. But if it's there, everybody's in there, that's great. Matt, and then I'll come to you, Dan.
I think what Mark suggested in terms of the additions is good and relevant for us in the South East, so thank you very much for that. It's great that the other two are on board. Happy days too. Look, the position paper is very good as a position paper, and I agree with the priorities that have been set. So I think this is a really good starting point. The key thing that isn't drawn out in the paper, but I mean needs to be really, is just sort of assessing those milestones going forward about how we're going to turn the ambitions in this into reality, so particularly in terms of scheme delivery. And I'll be interested to sort of see this come back in a few months and what progress has been made, because I think that will judge whether this collaboration has been worthwhile or not, and whether the DfT are interested in hearing from us collectively.
Good point. Dan?
Yeah, 2 points. First, just to come back on your question about other areas. I mean, I sit on the boards of the other STBs too, and yeah, and I just confirm what you've said really, that both EH and Transport East are very sort of committed to this model, and their members are. So I think it's a good example of cross STB working that certainly seems so far to be really effective, and suits well the sort of I guess the sort of political and devolution geography of this part of the country. So so definitely support that. Going back to your comment just then, actually, I mean, I think I'd agree it's good to revisit it, but I think also continue to do that and giving it a little bit of time, because there will be, I think, inevitably things in the rail world don't move as fast as a lot of us would like them to, and the GBR and everything else is going to take its time. So I think it's definitely worth persisting with the model. Yeah. But certainly try and see if you're getting from DfT what you feel you need from DfT. I mean, I know my colleagues are committed and coming to this forum. I think also there's going to be quite an interesting evolution probably of what this partnership does over time, and with the devolution picture, whether there are going to be mayors in this area, what, if and when you get mayors, what their views will be, what sort of role they will want to play, and the sort of the desire of a mayor to have more of a say versus how. So I think it's one of those things that will evolve, and that some things we can't, none of us know at the moment. But so I think keeping it as a flexible sort of construct, but something that evolves, but along all lines, you said, I think it's really positive.
Thank you. Joy, did I see you?
Yeah, I just wondered if there was a piece here on, obviously, if I think about the hierarchy of where railway sits, if I think about footway, highway, etc., it's inferred the link from a highways and perspective, and obviously the rail is down to the ports, but it would be, given where we are and given some of the opportunities, there's nothing really said about the links to the airports, both Heathrow and Gatwick. And I don't know whether that needs to come in somewhere. Just a question.
Yeah. Well, just quickly, that, as I sort of said, that very point came up at Senior Officer Group, and it is one of the points that we want to put in a revised version of the paper about emphasising the importance of rail links to the airports. So there will be a revised version of the paper that...
It's been an issue that's been raised frequently in the past.
Yeah. John?
I mean, I welcome the potential for collaboration. It's really good. Hopefully the positivity will go forward. I still think we've got to get away, it's difficult though, about this COVID, because pre-COVID and post-COVID, and we're supposedly in the post-COVID world where rail travel is not as popular as it used to be. I think we've got to get away from that, and we've got to promote it. So hopefully there'll be some promotion. We're going to be part of the consultation for Heathrow, for the new railway, for the new runway, and part of that is the link. Oh, certainly we're going to be saying that, because I think that's important. So it's really good points to get that added in, because that became crucial to get into the airport, and Gatwick as well.
I was going to say, that's
And
what
Gatwick
we said
as
about
well.
Gatwick.
Yeah, and Gatwick as well. So that both of them, if there's going to be expansion, it's got to be a transport link as well. It can't be just one without the other. So we'll definitely agree with that point.
Thank you. And we've always been in there on both those consultations, and we were very pleased to be have someone sit on the board last time when they were looking at East Row, and so hopefully we can try and get the same sort of connection back there again as we go forward. Tim.
We've talked about access to airports and the like, but could I also make the point that there's half a dozen rail lines which intersect protected, well, certainly the national parks, New Forest and Southlands National Park Authority, containing well over a dozen railway stations. And so, while we're not suggesting this is the major driver at all, but nonetheless it's something we should bear in mind as a means of promoting access to that kind of green space.
You've noted that.
Can I sound like an old record? You know that point we discussed about performance monitoring and enhancements? Any chance we can somehow introduce it here?
I think we do virtually monitor performance on most things, but is it something specific we can...
I think, yes.
Sorry.
No.
I suppose the shorter answer is yes. The longer answer is a bit more nuanced in that there's a number of bodies that oversee performance for rail. So OOR do, for example, as do the DFT. And I think it becomes more significant as train operating companies become, get my phraseology right, effectively in public control.
Yeah.
So the Secretary of State will be taking a direct view on performance, and that's one of the reasons why she has brought them back in. So that's a more nuanced answer. I think there is a desire across, from a TfL, the 3 STBs, and Network Rail perspective to have some sort of oversight on, on performance, particularly as you move into these newer relationships. And I think, the important thing, I think it says it in the paper somewhere, that for those current wider South East train operating companies, so that's in EEH, Transport East and our area, they generate 50% of the fare box, by comparison to the whole of the country. So, it's, for the South East, rail is massive. It's a big strategic enabler. It is, and the relationship with London is important. And when you put those two together, well, I know most of the time we're trying to take London out of the South East equation because we don't want it to skew us. But when you add it together, the GVA additionality is massive. And, performance, Councillor Ennis talked about pre and post-COVID, it is shifting. The patronage is increasing and fare box is increasing. But we know there are connectivity gaps, and we've spoken about airports. We know there is integration outside of the sort of TfL area. So TfL we know is pretty well integrated. And who drives into central London? You're mad too, aren't you? Because the integration is there. But it's less so outside. But we also know there's quite a significant fiscal constraint at the moment. So if you look at the control period for rail at the current time, it is focused on maintenance renewals rather than enhancements, and money is constrained. But we also know leisure is growing, and so that picks up Tim's point about how are people accessing green spaces. Well, rail is becoming increasingly popular, and the number of people that are taking trips we know from London and surrounds down to the South Downs, to take a specific example, but also coastline is significant. We also know, because of our ports and airports, that it is going to play an important story in the government's desire to get more freight off road and onto rail. And we know it contributes to growth. And it comes back to the points about spatial development strategies. You get those right, and you have them where you've got good transport connectivity, and which we do have in some places. Then it supports the growth agenda as well. So when you pull all those things together, performance becomes quite important. What we don't want to do is duplicate the work of other bodies, but we do want to have that sort of broad overview as well. Is this going in the right direction? I don't think we're going to be in a place of saying the 10:02 was 3 minutes late, but we are going to be in a place of saying, look, in order for this to work effectively, to be an enabler, to support growth, and all the things I've run through, you need to have an effective and efficient railway that needs to be operating well. And I think that's where the 3 STBs, through members and chairs, is a powerful voice to add into the OOR and into the DFT to say, hey, you brought these back in. we still have concerns about performance, what's the story. And I think as mayors get, determine what they want to do in terms of their manifesto promises, that becomes quite an interesting space, as Dan has picked up upon.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, of course, you've got the maintenance of Network Rail. Because
Yes.
quite often the performance is impacted by delayed engineering works. You know, and it's, so when we say monitoring of performance, it isn't just about is the 1002 on time.
Yeah,
It's about
absolutely.
how is the maintenance of the rail network.
Track accessibility.
Exactly,
Yeah.
track accessibility. Thank you. How's that performing?
Thank you. And that pick up some themes there, so performance, but also the maintenance points. It's in partly to do with resilience within the system. So have options you can take out of less length of track. There's actually another route to enable that, not reliant always on the road to fall back on. So that'd be very positive if that was possible. But my primary question is also about ticketing and price points within this, because if you and I know it may not be the main focus here, but to get more people to use the railways, they've got to be affordable and preferably cheaper than somebody driving that same route or flying that same route, which presently is the case that you can fly some of the routes for cheaper than you can get a train, particularly at shorter notice. And I think to encourage that transition, that growth within that rail network, no doubt we need to look at the price points within it.
Sure, that's noted. Okay. Again, really helpful conversation. Are we happy to accept the recommendation as printed? That'll save me a bit of reading. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. On to agenda item 11, which is scheme development funding. And Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. The purpose of this paper is to set out the process that we've used to identify which schemes should receive scheme development support this year and ask you to agree those schemes to receive that funding. So the criteria for assessing a scheme's eligibility to receive support is unchanged from previous years, and that is that the scheme should be named within our strategic investment plan. The funding is required for either a feasibility study or a strategic outline business case, and there's a maximum funding allocation of £100,000. Now, following feedback from both yourselves at the last partnership board and also our local transport authorities through Transport Strategy Working Group and Senior Officer Group, also reflecting that the amount of funding available this year is reduced from previous years, the process we've used to identify schemes has been slightly different from in previous years. We have had 2 sessions of engagement with both Transport Strategy Working Group and Senior Officer Group. The first one was talking around the process that we should use, and then the second one was asking for their comments on the schemes that were to be selected. 3 lists of schemes that actually met the eligibility criteria were prepared as follows. And since the last year, the major change that has happened is that the board submitted to the Department for Transport some lists of priority schemes for the area. And so it was very much felt through the work with Transport Strategy Working Group and Senior Officer Group that in selecting schemes that receive support, the schemes that we had identified only a few months earlier as priorities for the region should be a top consideration. So there were those list of schemes that had previously been agreed by the board. There were also schemes that had submitted an interest in receiving scheme development support in 2023 and 2024 that had not already received that support. And then we also undertake a piece of work every year with all the authorities to understand where schemes are in their development as part of updating the delivery action plan that is attached to the SIP. So that short list of schemes was drawn up, those 3, and the 3 were combined, as you can see in the diagram at figure 1. And from those 3 lists, there were 2 schemes that actually featured in all 3 of those lists. 2 of them featured in 2 lists, and another one also featured in 2 different lists. So looking at the amount of funding that was available and the amount of funding that was asked for, alongside where those schemes featured within those priority lists, the 150,000 that is available is suggested is allocated to the South East Hampshire Rapid Transit Scheme and the Southampton Mass Transit Schemes. They are asking between them for a total of 150,000, and both of those schemes featured in all 3 of those shortlists that we drew up. Within the finance report, you will have noticed that part of the particularly underspend this year is also down to the lack of being able to get the money for scheme development support out of the door. And so in our discussions with all the authorities that had a potential scheme, we did have discussions about being actually ready to go. We have experienced this year that some of the schemes were not as ready to go as might have been ideal, and that's led to delays in the scheme starting and then subsequent delays in spending money. So another one of the considerations this year was to make sure that when a scheme is offered funding, it is actually ready to go and we can allocate that funding and get the work underway as soon as possible. So in short, the recommendations are to comment on the process and then to agree the schemes which should receive support.
Thank you. Any comments? Joy.
I was just going to ask about the process. I can see that we've got 3 items, 3 sections on the Venn diagram. So I had a question with one, which is filtered to those schemes with work planned in the next 3 years. Is that the work for the development, putting together the development, or is it the deliverability of the scheme itself? Because I suppose I would ask the question, what is the I'd look at the deliverability of schemes, because if they've got a chance of being delivered in a shorter term rather than long term, shouldn't we be putting our money into getting those done sooner rather than those that would be a nice to have, but actually it could be 10 years out before we get funding?
Yes, I mean, the ESS, as you said, it's for which work is planned on the development within the next 3 years. But the two are sort of linked because, in general, given the current financial situation, yourselves and other local authorities are not bringing forward schemes for which there isn't a sort of likely chance of them getting funding in the future. So,
is that delay getting money from DFT?
Sorry, say
is that because of the way in which we currently have to sort of bid for monies from DFT?
For the schemes themselves. I think it's a number of things. I think it's also the resources, within the local authorities, that there are other priorities more important at the moment than a scheme which may receive funding from DFT in sort of 5 years' time or so.
Yeah, I think there's a range of reasons. Not least revenue is tight for authorities at the minute. Everybody's facing massive pressures around social care, which means your constraint on revenue is heightened, and subsequently your ability to borrow changes because you need your revenue stream to borrow. I think the other element is at the point at which you get funding, get your outline business case approval from government, do you still have an appetite to take it forward, given there may be a risk of, where does the risk of overspend sit, given those constraints? So that's another challenge. And I think, Sarah's point, actually, about, frankly, it's no good everybody sticking their hand up saying, give us the money because I want to bring a scheme forward, if they can't bring a scheme forward. And we find ourselves in a place where we've found a number of authorities not ready, and that has slowed us getting money out the door. So, there's something about picking ones that we know are going to move forward, and that's not, sort of unilateral, what do we think? It's engagement with the officers in the authorities to say, right, what's the likelihood of this moving forward? What's the appetite? Can we move at pace? And I think the 2 schemes that I identified are sensible ones. We do recognise, though, that, and this has been highlighted by a number of members, that going forward, and I think this forms part of the spending review of the department, what's really important for local authorities is scheme delivery. So doing the things that are going to make a transformational difference to people's lives and how they travel and all the rest of it. And so, we would hope that more money through the spending review process becomes available for us to enable us to take more schemes through the process and enable them to proceed to be successful with government.
Thank you. So I absolutely understand the thinking behind the Venn diagram, and the line on the map, and therefore scheme delivery is very important, and I understand the priorities that have been highlighted both within this forum here as well, so not to take that away. I'm looking really at one just beneath the line there, and one in our City A27 Brighton Junction. And within this context of the sum that's required, is there some valuation of the cost benefits to the wider economics of this, within this context? Because could it be, could that line be adjusted if you look at the financial benefits to the region, you know, in that regard, and therefore potentially bring those into the viable option?
Are you referring to sort of the cost benefit of each individual scheme, whether that's part of the constitution? Yeah, I mean, it's not currently, we don't have a cost benefit analysis for each of the schemes individually within the strategic investment plan. The strategic investment plan is done on packages of schemes for particular areas and particular modes as well, because of the way the modelling had to work. So we don't have that information with it to inform those decisions. It is more on a deliverability side of things. In that the schemes are all the schemes in the SIP have been identified obviously as priorities, so they are all taken as needed for the area.
And I think you know, mass transit schemes generate quite significant benefit cost ratios generally. I think the risk, and I'll speak frankly because I think it's important, is we all end up like the seagulls in that cartoon where we all go mine, 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 mine. And the challenge for us or for you as members is to go, actually, we recognise funding is limited. We've done a fairly sensible process that, of course, is challengeable and debatable, but we think, you know, it cuts it about right. The big challenge for us going forward, and this is how we influence the spending review, is securing further money from government so that, you know, in a year's time, Trevor, we're having a conversation about all of these going through because we've got the funding. But at the moment, we've just done a cut. We've had a conversation with colleagues in local authorities, and Sarah set out the sort of Venn diagram, if you like. And this is our best stab at something that we think can get done, money can get spent, delivers benefit. But please don't, in doing that, think that we've lost sight of the ones that are currently falling below the line. We absolutely haven't, and that's the spending review conversation.
I've just come back and thank you for that answer. It's really helpful, actually, to understand that, and therefore, in a year's time or in some other period ahead, that may be the case that they are considered and brought into funded accordingly. Is it linked to a 3-year funding settlement, or is it 1 year? How does it all fit?
I think from memory, the spending review is a 3-year revenue and a 4-year capital.
Or is it the other way around? It's definitely 3 and a 4.
3 or 4 years.
Yes, one's 3, one's 4, and I think I thought the other way around, but you might be right.
Okay.
I mean, but broadly speaking, yes, it is actually, relatively speaking, when you look at some of these types of schemes, are quite a short spending window, and so it's more about development at this point than it's going to be about the delivery of any long-term solution, which is likely to be more than 3 years in the future if we take a 3-year point.
Okay. Any other?
Am I allowed to be parochial? Because
Trevor's just been brought.
because both of these schemes are in my area, aren't they? And you know, the benefits that, you know, the triggers that will come as a result of having this funding are, you know, really beneficial to, you know, various modes of transport actually, and particularly sort of around Southampton, but also actually South East, which is my area where I actually live. We need this desperately, and it will feed into Portsmouth and various other towns around the area. So I'm very pleased. Thank you very much.
If I can just pick up on that as well, when we do provide support and the work is finished, we do go back to officers with a questionnaire to understand the difference that it has made. So that's not necessarily the difference the scheme has made, but the difference that the funding has made to delivering the schemes, and you know, that sort of comes into the considerations as we're looking to go forward. And I think it's safe to say, you know, needs to be remembered that whilst this funding is absolutely great, and I think it's good that we're giving it, you know, to now the scheme development, there's a lot more other support that we offer as well. And I think over the last 2 years now that this scheme has been running, we're finding it's not just the money that's needed, there's the other benefits through the Centre of Excellence, the sharing of expertise, the sort of business case workshops that we've been running that are really helping to move those schemes forward. So I think going forward, you know, with hopefully a longer term funding settlement, we can come to you with some more rounded, you know, not just giving money, but how we offer a whole package of support around it.
Brilliant. That's a really important point. Yeah. Thank you. We have the recommendation in front of us. Are we happy to agree those? Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Sorry. Have we got time? I mean, I don't know if it's out there, is it? Oh, do you want a break, or do you want to just go and get some? I don't mind. It's up to you. Go and grab a cup of tea, and then we'll resume. Not that I'm being mean, but I've got a train to catch. About 5 minutes time. Matt, I've noted your point. Don't get too excited.
That's right. I can probably have on to about 10 past.
Well, then that could be a good time, couldn't it, to aim for?
So we've only got...
Yeah. I think we're almost there. We've got some very important bits coming up. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, no, I do. Yeah. Well done. No, I'm fine, thank you. No, I understand totally. It's surprising it's still... Sorry? Yes, up for noting. But, yeah, I'm sure we're well on the way with all of your great cooperation. Is this providing value for money, Dan, having a tea break or not?
I think so.
You think so?
Particularly since I missed the coffee. I arrived too late for the first time round, so it's definitely providing me value for money.
Good. When you reach a certain age in life, you recognise that what goes in has to come out.
Well,
so
there is
I
always
have to
that, yes.
Limit mine to one cup, one glass.
There is always that risk, isn't there?
Yeah. Generally, things are settled at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
there's a lot of turmoil generally. But...
I mean, there's a lot of turmoil generally. I think there's quite a lot of things sort of whirling around, I'd say, at the moment. There's obviously the spending review where we've sort of gone into that kind of peak. Now it's kind of... It's just a period of... That's with the Treasury now, or departments with the Treasury, and there's quite a lot swirling around there in between departmental returns and industrial strategy, and how these different things join up, and then there's the sort of slightly odd backdrop of, as you've probably picked up, things like civil service reform legislation, wanting to abolish loads of what they quangos, but what does that mean to everybody? And all these kind of things just create a slightly febrile background, if you know what I mean, because I think it will make a great impact, but even there was something I think you might be thinking about regulators, so even the ORR get kind of dragged into that as a sort of a suggestion of, do we need to change how we do regulators? There's quite a lot of this sort of reform stuff swirling around, but I think, the spending review is sort of into the kind of detailed bit now, where
So we're on to, what are we on to now, Mark? Regional?
Regional active travel strategy, item.
Ready to go again, folks? Thank you very much. So we come on to agenda item 12, which is the Regional Active Travel Strategy and Action Plan. Is that you, Mark?
It is indeed.
Thank you.
So thank you, Chair. The purpose of this paper is to ask the board to agree the Transport for the South East Regional Active Travel Strategy and Action Plan. So members are invited to comment on the changes that we made to the action plan following the board meeting on the 28th of October, at which a number of comments were made, particularly about the Strategic Active Travel Network map. So in view of this, an additional opportunity to comment on the network map was offered out to the local transport authorities and those district and borough councils that have been involved in the development of local walking and cycling infrastructure plans. A number of comments were received, and as a result, a number of amendments have been made to the strategy document. So what we did was circulated out a technical note to invite additional responses. Importantly, the technical note set out the relationship between the Strategic Active Travel Network and the cycling and walking improvements that have been identified in LC WIPs. And this was just to emphasise that the Strategic Active Travel Network is an aspirational and indicative network. So rather than seeks to join up existing and planned routes across boundaries to highlight the opportunities for future work. It is designed to complement and support rather than duplicate the work being undertaken at a local level and join up cross-boundary routes that might not otherwise be promoted. It's not a blueprint or a specific routes or infrastructure for delivery, but is intended to act as a guide for local transport authorities in delivering their own plans within the region. So what we've done is inserted that text that I've just referred to into the RATSAP document just to make it absolutely clear how the network should be interpreted. So in response to that call for further comments, we had comments from 9 local transport authorities and boroughs and districts. We also had a meeting with Tonbridge and Morling just to discuss specific concerns that they set out in a letter that we received. And the comments that we received and the changes we're going to make are set out in Appendix 2. A revised copy of the Strategic Active Travel Network map is set out in Appendix 3 that takes account of those changes that were requested. And a revised version of the RATSAP document is included in Appendix 4 with that additional text in that clearly explains the relationship between that network and the existing work going on with LC WIPs. So as a consequence, the recommendation is that the members of the board agree the revised version of the transport strategy, the revised version of the regional active travel strategy and action plan.
Thank you, Mark. Questions or comments? Trevor, followed by Dan.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. I've certainly welcomed this, and this amendment makes an awful lot of sense, and I appreciate the value of this, and I touched on this earlier in the meeting, to be fair. In both the strategic context and the LC WIP, both of which are essentially aspirational and not necessarily funded plans. And yes, the local context is very, very important. That cross-boundary is also vital to develop these cycle and walking routes. I have one in mind when I say this, but it's to do with the context of work from Brighton and Hove, where we go into the neighbouring authority, and I'm thinking of Shoreham in this case. The cycle routes along there, it's so vital to have a connection. Otherwise, you'll get a cycle route which stops close to the boundary or doesn't connect well. It's really good to have this strategic document, an insertion within this document. But how do local authorities that neighbour in this way best work together to achieve a seamless connections along such routes? And the other point, which I did frame earlier in the meeting in the context of the strategic consultation that's ongoing, is how to ensure that we do have the voice of the pedestrian and those with accessibility needs for our pavement infrastructure as well. It is important to have cycle routes. I'm not dismissing that in any way, but it's vital within this to ensure that both pedestrians and those with accessibility needs that via these walkways, for instance, are fully considered as well.
Thank you. Daniel.
Putting a very parochial hat on for the Isle of Wight. First of all, I think this is a superb piece of work, and I think it's really important that we do take this wider strategic view. It's a recommendation on the map I think I tried to make a while back, but maybe I didn't express it very well. The ferries to the Isle of Wight are part of the network, and I think it would be very helpful to the Isle of Wight MPs and the local authority if they were marked as such, if that would be possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think it was you now. You next, please, Joy, and then I can.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've got a number of points, and I would like to sort of pick up on them. I think I'll pick up on my fellow councillors a couple of points, and I think joining up across the boundaries is really useful, though sometimes I feel you might not understand some of the issues that we're facing, such as Section 106, ownership of the land, etc., etc. So it won't be happening anytime soon, I think, believe. Just to set your expectations. But what I suppose how I'll start is if I look at the first page, which is the picture. Yeah. And on that picture, we have there's 8 pictures, and 6 of them show cycling. And only 2 are related to walking. They're all the pictures of the cycling are in cities. There is no countryside walking or cycling. Certainly no pictures of our prows or our pavements. And as 85% of the people doing active travel plus are actually walking, it does seem a little disproportionate. So I just thought I would just make that point, because it looks like it's a cycling active travel, not a walking and cycling active travel. So I suppose I'd ask the question relating to that is, in terms of the cycling, it would be really useful to have understood the age groups of those proportionally who are cycling. Those who are commuting, cycling, those who are using it for leisure, particularly the cycling groups, which are very different. I think we've all seen the cycling groups out, and they do long distances. Those who are doing it for more of a sort of leisure, but perhaps with family, just a small, a family group. Those who are using it for local travel, popping to the shops, popping to see a friend, etc. And those who are using it for schools, for travelling to school, particularly children and teachers. That would have been really, I think, quite useful to understand. And then get an understanding of those people. And then another issue I thought about was, you talked about multi-use paths. To my mind, we've got, well, I know for a fact in my own county, we've got 4,000 kilometres of public rights of way. Now, at the moment, they're footpaths. We also have bridleways as well. And there are limits to who can use footpaths, and we know that cycles technically can't. But is there something in the legislation that possibly we need to be looking at for the future so we can explore that multi-use? I know that could be quite difficult with some of our farmers, but especially given at the moment. But I mean, obviously there's a cost versus benefit on that particular point. And that might open up a myriad of cycleways or cycle routes for people if we could open up more of the footpaths. Sorry, was there anything else I was going to ask about? Yeah, and I suppose I was really sort of looking at how we can improve walking. Because if we look at most of the active travel, it's done for probably the first mile or two. And it's usually either after parking a car, getting off a train or a bus, etc. And therefore, how can we improve those walking routes? Well, perhaps it's improving our pavement infrastructure, thinking about pavements, lighting, etc. Especially in some of the rural areas, particularly in those villages that are now once were hamlets, which are now super villages as a consequence of planning. and yet doesn't feel like the infrastructure's moved with them, because it's been incremental planning, not mass planning. And I suppose it would have been interesting to think about the electric bikes and the impact electric bikes are having. Does it mean that people are travelling further as well, rather than just on a manual bike? You see this is where I'm sort of going with this. I suppose anyway, it just feels sometimes that we're advocating that the way forward is to go backwards.
Yep.
Can I just say that? And it just sometimes just concerns me, because if I look at the appetite that I see around me, both young and old, I'm not seeing it, and I'm certainly not seeing that usage on the bus routes, on these cycle routes that I would expect to see. And it's going to be different whether you're in a city, town, or a rural area. I do appreciate that. It also depends on topography. It's all right if you're in a coastal strip where it's very flat, but as soon as, I mean, I saw the pictures of those in Lewis, those Deliveroo cycles, and I thought, good luck to you up some of those hills. Unless they're
Tough in
electric.
Sussex.
Exactly.
East
That's-
Sussex, anyway.
And I was also thinking about the age profile. That's why I asked about age group cycling, particularly if you've got what I call, it appears to be fast becoming, my particular county, fast becoming retirement to the countryside and the coastal strip, Ville, where there is far less of an appetite. Or potentially they never even learnt to cycle. Anyway, I thought I'd throw those in.
Very interesting start to a conversation. Matt?
Thank you, Keith. And I'm grateful for Mark entertaining some of the issues that Kent and some districts and boroughs, particularly my own, had with the initial version. I think where we've got to at the moment is better, and I'm very grateful for that. I suppose my problem with this is a principled issue rather than the detail of it. So I'm not going to worry about what the pictures say or what the words say. And from a district and borough council perspective, as local planning authorities generally in the rural areas, we obviously have a tricky enough job putting together those local plans in the first place and really understanding what our active travel strategies, or LC WIPs, whatever you want to call them, look like in the context of current and future development opportunities. And what we're trying to do, and what a number of other districts and boroughs have done, is really look at a line in the local plan with the active travel strategy and looking bottom up in terms of those approaches so far, because I think there is a danger, and this is certainly one of the concerns that I get, that any sort of strategy that is certainly larger than a borough geography runs the risk of pandering to those hardcore dedicated cyclists in particular. I'm going to pick on cyclists here because I think the point that Joy makes is right about this is also being cycling dominated for what is a minority pursuit in many areas. People who want to travel and ride 20 miles from A to B rather than actually can you just like make the connection a bit better between between the community or not. Now this has a go at it, but as I mentioned last time, it had the problem, I think, of not being able to layer in that local knowledge in every place, which is what we tried hard to resolve. But we obviously base that from a Transport for the South East perspective on the strategic investment plan and the active travel packages that have been funded through that, many of which are part of the National Cycle Network. But that then doesn't become a locally led initiative. That becomes an initiative that's led on a southeast basis. So again, it goes back to those, it doesn't do the nitty-gritty of connecting communities. It looks at stuff that's 15, 20 miles apart. So I really struggle with this, not because the concerns haven't been taken on board, but because I don't think there is any way of avoiding what Mark described at the outset about this colliding really with what's happening at a local level, because you want to build up active travel strategies on a really localised basis if they're to work properly. You don't want to say, well, actually, this route has been identified in the RATSAP on a southeast basis, so therefore you're going to have to include that in your active travel strategy. And if your active travel strategy on a local level or your LC WIP doesn't doesn't want that, then what happens? How do you get the funding into the things that really matter? And that is where I think this concept of the RAPSAP is something that I really struggle with. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim. Use your mic, please.
I'm wondering to myself quite what the relationship this aspirational picture is, and action on the ground and things that either have happened or could conceivably be made to happen. I have in front of me the map of the South Downs Way, for example, which is in place and exists and is widely used. It isn't on here. There is, however, an east-west path which kind of follows a track to the north, significantly to the north of where the South Downs Way actually is. I don't think it exists on the ground, well, it's aspirational in it, so that's fair enough. But when we already have a well-known east-west path in place from end to end of the South Downs National Park, which stretches across much of this area, I'm not against more paths at all. We are working on our own LC WIP as a national park, but I can't quite understand the rationale of a path or desire line which parallels the existing end-to-end long-distance path and doesn't seem to tie in with it. I only take that as a case study or an example, but it leaves me a little unclear as to what to make of these lines, these aspirational lines generally. Does aspirational mean we want them to happen, or that it's up to someone else to decide whether they should happen? I'm just not sure how much weight to attach to what we see here.
Yes, so just working through some of the points that have been right. I think on the last thing, I think we tried with the language to make it absolutely clear what this map is trying to do and what it's not. It's not mapping, it's not, and the intention is not to map existing routes and the relationship with it. It's about, I think, to answer your question, yes, it is a guide for somebody who's approaching the introduction of additional cycling infrastructure locally to think about the places that potentially need joining up when they're doing that. So it's not about, as I said, it's not a blueprint for dictating where the routes should go, and they're not, they're desire lines rather than routes. It's not saying we must have a route between X and Y. So that's why the additional text that was included in the note and is the additional text that's gone into the document to make that absolutely clear about the relationship. In terms of the sort of the picking up on the points about sort of local versus what's in the map, again, as I've said, and we've tried to emphasise, this is about acting as a guide rather than a blueprint for a series of routes that must be introduced. And I think the point to the additional text that we put into the document to try and make that absolutely clear as we possibly can. In terms of some of the points that were raised about thinking about additional work that we could do, the points about first mile, last mile, connectivity for cycling, for walkers particularly, this further breakdown of the profile of those who are cycling and walking. We've just had as you know, a travel survey done, so that potentially would provide us with the information that we would need to provide a bit of a better breakdown of the way in which these facilities are being used. So there are clearly some ideas there for some future work that we could potentially undertake as part of the action plan implementation.
And the ferry, you noted the ferry.
The ferry, yeah, putting the ferries on the map.
Absolutely.
Just a quick one following on from David is, actually I noticed the Downs whatever link is not in there either, and some of these connections here are actually already there.
It's aspirational and it's happened, so there you go.
Oh, it's the old railway line.
There you go. Any other comments or questions?
Actually, I might just make one, if I may, Chair. So, I mean, if you remember, the board wanted us to do this work. We've got it agreed off here.
Yeah.
You know, these strategies inform local transport plans, which is very much in the remit of local transport authorities, and indeed will be in the remit of combined authorities going forward. Those LTPs help drive local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. And I take the point that, I can't remember which of you raised it about, you know, funding being aspirational in the sense that you set out these things, but there's no guarantee of funding. And everybody's fishing in the pool to try and get funding for their local walking and cycling infrastructure plans. And some of the Active Travel England funding has been incredibly helpful for some authorities over the last couple of years. And that then has an impact on delivery. So, you know, that in some respects is how the sort of line of sight, if you like. I think Mark has set out, you know, clearly what this is and what this isn't, more importantly. I mean, there are a number of comments. I think, Councillor Dennis, you mentioned, you know, could you transform more footpath rights of way to bridleways? I mean, again, that's a local, to my mind, that's a local countryside rights of way team to decide, do we want to go through the aggro of changing a footpath to a bridleway? And all the consultation and the, you know, potentially in a public inquiry and all those sorts of things. But I think those are very much, you know, a combination of local walking and cycling infrastructure plans, you know, dialogue between the Highways Authority, well, Highways Authority is the rights of way lot, aren't they? But getting those two together to determine which is appropriate. We have tried to navigate a path taking account of Matt's comments from at the previous meeting and a very helpful meeting with Bartholomew and other colleagues, officer colleagues, as well as hearing your feedback. I think this is going to be one of these things where we can't please all the people all the time. It's quite a challenging one. But I think we've, you know, given a good go and heard, you know, with evidence, heard from officials, officers at local authorities, heard first-hand from members around this table, and we've, you know, with the technical note, I think helps to clarify a few bits and bobs. You know, I think my view is another iteration of this isn't, we're going to have the same debate at the next board meeting. And you know, my view in you deliberating this now would be, look, we're there or thereabouts. We recognise there are points of disagreement, but broadly, if you follow the sort of line of sight on who has responsibility for delivering locally, that's really important. How are we setting out what could potentially happen across boundary? This is what this aims to do, and provides a little bit of evidence within it to help LTPs and local cycling and walking plans. So I just thought it'd be useful to sum that up.
Yep.
So,
Thank you. Well, go on, then I'll come to Matt. Oh, sorry. No, carry on, you go.
Just very briefly, I don't want to be numbered amongst the at all, because I was really just seeking clarification.
Yep.
Actually, as I look at this, I think to myself, well, it's easy to get sort of landmarks on some of that way, you know, but then actually this makes us think about other desire lines.
Yep.
And what I'm confident, and I think that is useful to get that right.
Good. Matt.
Thank you. What the problem I have, Rupert very eloquently explained, it is that line of sight. That is exactly the problem that I've got with this document, because this informs what LTPs do, and then LTPs talk to LPAs. No, it should be the other way round. That's the thing. The best active travel schemes, in my opinion, are those which have been delivered really locally in terms of having the greatest impact. Sometimes they're really small in terms of just connecting different communities or connecting part of the same communities. The ones that have caused them the most issues, and again based off of our experience, has been where a pot of money has arrived from the DFT with whoever, and we've sought to do, we being the sort of the local government family, have sought to sort of do implement grand schemes that just haven't worked. And that's probably, I'm afraid to say, Rupert, you've concerned me even more by what you've said there about the purpose of the strategy. You are right, though, in terms of the fact that we could talk about this until the cows come home. I do think this is better, and I'm grateful for the technical note, but my issue with this is a principled issue, not about the detail.
And I think if we cut back to your first statement, you're back where we started. Yeah, exactly. There you go. So we can keep going round, joy, but thanks.
Similarly to Mark, I would be more comfortable if the header was regional cycling active travel, to be brutally honest, and overall connectivity, because you just said, I mean, with the active travel monies we receive, we'll be using much more about connecting small routes and making small improvements which have much better value for money.
So where do you want to go, folks? Because, at the end of the day, this is a board decision. This is not my decision. I'm absolutely convinced that the team have heard and change things where they can. We now have a document that means something to some people. It doesn't hit all of the buttons for everybody. Is it better to have that, or is it better to just say, no, we're going to pontificate some more and still not get a document? I'm in your hands entirely. I mean, I just genuinely think, as somebody who walks every day and hasn't cycled for 20 years, that actually it cuts the ice for an awful lot of people, and it sets out some broad brush principles. It doesn't actually deal with the intimate bits that you talked about. John?
Yeah, I agree. I totally understand that it is different. The relevance is different to different parts of the communities in the South East. Totally get that. For our area, it's relevant.
Yep.
And we're probably trying to move faster. Not without criticism, mind you, to be honest. And we're trying to grapple with e-bikes and trying to grapple with scooters, and that's just a minor comment I was going to make, but I won't. But I would be supporting this, and I would hope it would stay, and then maybe it would be further nuanced or whatever to understand the communities that, the coastal communities and the more rural. But personally, I wouldn't want to lose it, because I think it's relevant. Certainly relevant to. I think it's relevant to an urban area myself.
Daniel and
can I quickly add to that then a question? Does it actually set back where you don't think it's as relevant as you'd like it? Does it actually set you back?
Please, then we'll move on, because we'll be here to all.
Yeah, we could, and I needed to go 20 minutes ago, but I don't think it helps at all, and I think there is a danger if the LPA isn't on board or is doing its active travel strategy at an awkward time. I think there is a danger of setting back, so that's my concern. Now, I think that can be mitigated, but it's not helpful to have two different documents about the same thing that may have competing priorities.
I think that's the point. Then you need to acknowledge and if possible, mitigate slightly with as minimal effort as possible.
Trevor?
Yeah, sorry. I think it's both important to recognise that the strategic and the LC WIP are aspirational, and therefore it's nuance as to where you put the emphasis and where the resource is to deliver that. I would agree there may be it is important to make sure we don't lose the pedestrian and the accessibility aspects of this. That's very, very important, as well as develop a good, safe infrastructure for cycling as well, so all forms of active travel. But it's also recognising active travel is integrated to a multimodal approach, so you get good walk-in connections to the bus stop and good cycling connections to the train station. It's all vital to this sort of hub, a developing region, transport hubs within it. So I would support the view, and I think Rupert said, let's not go around this buoy again. If we can get something from this and take it forward, but also keep it fresh and refreshed as we need to make sure we get the emphasis right for each part of the region.
And I just go back to the title. It is the Regional Active Travel Strategy. Now, whether we agree there's enough walking and cycling in there is neither here nor there. But this isn't about the individual LT whips that make it up, and it's not about the individual schemes that make it up. But I understand exactly what you're saying about the context in which you said it. But listen, we're not going to fix it now, short of having a vote, and if we need to, we will. So the recommendations are, we've made our comments, so I think that's fine. So we now need to agree the revised version of Transport Active Travel Strategy, or we don't. So those in favour? 2, 3, 4. Those against? 3. Okay. We will continue to revise as we go forward. Obviously, there are things that we can alter, and there are things that we can't. So we will take all of the points that you've raised on board. And thank you very much for the work you've done so far, and I'm sure there's still plenty to do, Mark. So we'll move on to agenda item 13 and transport strategy. Mark, that's you again.
Yes, so this is an update report just to advise the board on where we are with the progress of the development of the transport strategy. So the consultation on the draft strategy closed on Friday the 7th of March. We've had a range of engagement activities to support the consultation. James Boys will be talking a little bit more about those in his communications report. On that one. But the good news is, just to highlight the very good response that we've had to the consultation, a total of 860 responses by questionnaire and written responses. This compares very favourably with the level of response that we got in 2020 on the first transport strategy, where we had 601. So a significant uplift, which I would suggest is down to the great work that's been done on publicising the consultation. Slight change in the numbers in terms of the number of responses from individuals and organisations. We haven't had as many organisations respond this time, but as I said, the overall news is good in terms of the level of response. We've worked very hard to ensure that we get responses from all our constituent authorities. Some of those are yet to arrive, but we're chasing those down. We've also had responses from some of our key stakeholders, those organisations that are represented on the board, including the South Downs National Park, TfL, Network Rail, and National Highway. So thank you for those. So in terms of next steps, a consultation report will be formulated, analysing the content of those responses. That will also make recommendations of changes that we feel are needed to take account of the comments that we've had. And so a report will come back to the board in July, where the board will be asked to agree the final strategy, taking account of the changes that we're suggesting. And as we've said, the final version of the strategy agreed by the board in October 2025.
Thank you, Mark. Thoughts, comments, questions? Very good update, and look forward to the revision. We are asked to George.
Just an interesting popular themes that were raised, which shows it's all about reliability.
Yep, absolutely. So we've done what it says on the tin. So are we happy with that? Thank you. Business Advisory Group. Daniel, are you going to introduce for us, please?
So, yes, thank you, Keith. Sadly, I was not able to make the last of our many meetings. We're very active. However, I can report that there's increasing engagement. One of the most important things to note is that we're planning a wider business group meeting in July, looking over at Jess and Kia. I think it's for the 9th of July, currently mooted. We're planning for about 80 organisations to be represented from across the region. We are in the process of formulating a straw man for the actual format to see how we can get those organisations to feed as much value into the STB as possible. So that's the main focus of our activity, but every time we get together, we draw again on the areas of interest and burning topics. notes, I believe, have been distributed, so I won't labour that. Have I missed anything fundamental, Jess and Keir? Oh, yes. The most important thing, so putting my Isle of Wight hat on, is that in an attempt to help with the underspend, but also do something that has real value, there is an issue around the ferries to the Isle of Wight, pricing, reliability, economic value and much more. So just for the record, there is gratitude from those parts for a small amount of money that has been provided by TFSE to do a study into how that economic value can be maximised. Sorry, not just economic, but social value to the Isle of Wight can be maximised through improvements to the ferries. And that goes alongside some work that's been done on the island with a revamped transport board, which has just been announced. It's going to be chaired by Sir Paul Kenny, former leader of the GMB trade union, sponsored by both Isle of Wight MPs who have been very active in this area, and they are all grateful for that investment by TFSE, which will be very valuable to them.
Brilliant. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Just something on buses, if I may. In the section on buses, it says seeking better certainty on funding, and I'm just wondering what sort of certainty you're looking for and from whom.
I think this is, so this wasn't the last meeting, so I wasn't in the discussion. I think it'd probably be more helpful if Keir or just step up and explain what happened there.
Please.
All right. So I think, so as part of the group, we have lots of different types of business, and some of them are bus operators. And one of their pieces of feedback was, like a lot of government funding, it can be stop-start. So the more you can do a multi-year full funding settlement to local authorities, that enables them to get the right kind of resources, procure vehicles on a longer-term basis, that enables them to deliver more. And I think there was a particular conversation about electric buses and hydrogen buses. So highlighting some of the success in West Sussex, but saying longer funding certainty and a longer term funding certainty will allow them to basically buy more of those types of buses.
I think it was also around the fare cap to see have some surety of how that the £2 or £3 fare can be maintained.
Joy, you had a question.
Yes, carry on. Probably the same bus operator discussed this particular issue as well, and that is around the hydrogen buses and the impact of planning restrictions and storage of hydrogen. We've had to come up with a real compromise there because of those issues. Gatwick Airport are actually being extremely helpful. So the biggest issue really is with the Health and Safety Committee, which I believe is under the portfolio actually of not of Department of Health, Department of Transport, but actually Work and Pensions, believe it or not. And the fact that they don't seem to be, with some obviously numbers of different bodies, keeping up with technology. And we need to, and they need to understand that hydrogen storage is not the same as butane, for example, which they're currently, regarding it in the same way. And that is part of the big challenges. As I alluded to earlier, it's where we've got our bus stations and garages, etc., tend to be in towns at the moment. So that is part of the restriction. But, it's a real issue because I can't have hydrogen buses if I can't have hydrogen somewhere.
Work and pensions.
Yeah, I know. It's work. I'm sure it's work and pensions. It's certainly not DFT.
So I think with that, if I may, Daniel, I think we took an action to feed that back to the Department for Transport, because I think they'll be able to help us in those conversations. But the other thing is, you mentioned the compromise you found through our Centre of Excellence. Teach other local authorities about that, because I think there'll be an interest across the region.
They've not been able to fulfil their total requirements, but at least it was part of our requirements. So it's only a part solution. We need a proper solution here, and a change in the regulation would be the best way forward.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just say something about health and safety and things? I mean, is this an issue going forward? you know, with the electricity supply, for example, and the health and safety attached to that, and now obviously with hydrogen as well, because that is going to have an impact on how we provide, you know, bus transport and where the depots. Is it a piece of work that could perhaps be
I think it's needed.
needed?
Okay.
Put it to the list.
It could be regulatory, it's more off-gem type.
Yeah. Nothing you want to add down?
Yeah, no, so this sounds like it does not a place-specific question, is it just to the South East, I mean, it sounds like a general question that you would want some guidance from either the energy regulator or from the
Yeah.
contacts.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Daniel. Stay there. It's Jeff now with the advisory panel on transport. I mean, these are for noting, so over to you.
Thank you. I'll try and make it quite quick. This is obviously we've had an advisory panel and we've had the transport forum for a number of years now. I was trying to work out whether it was 5 or 6 for the transport forum.
Since 2017.
Yeah.
Sorry?
2017.
2017.
We started off, yeah, so
Yeah.
7,
Yeah.
8, coming up for 8.
And in the early days, it provided a very good function. Because we got a whole room full of people interested in transport in the South East, and we encouraged the discussions that followed, and it was very good, and it introduced them to what we were trying to do. I think that the challenge, though, was over the years, it slowly dissipated, and you got a smaller number of people, and a smaller number of people with one bee in their bonnet, if I can put it
one
that
or
way.
two specialties, yes.
Yeah. So we were sort of losing the field or losing the house. I can't remember what the right phrase is. So in conversation with Keir, which is why I asked him to stay sitting there, I think what we would like to now do is to say, right, well, that's what we used to do. We want to go away, and also with the help from all the lovely people over my right shoulder here, who do a lot of the work, and come up with perhaps a different format or a different way of doing it. Because the other thing that has, I think we've lost a bit, is the groups that were in the Transport Forum saw their group, but weren't very good at spotting or understanding the things that are right on the boundary of that. And that's what we want to do. We want to go back and talk it amongst ourselves, and then come back with plan B or C, or is it plan D now? Right. I think next meeting is the 21st of July.
I think you're right.
I think.
I'll tell you in a minute.
And that's the AGM as well.
Okay.
Yeah. 21st, I think.
There you go. Yep.
I win
21st.
So I'm just wanting to clear that, because I think how we can get the people to better see people that are interested in other parts would be a good way forward, I think. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I could speak for longer, you know, if you want me to.
No, it's fine. But just hold it there for a second.
Okay.
Are there any questions for Jeff?
That's all.
Might be just. So it's helpful to hear. I think I'm mindful that we not long took the Transport Forum through a review and ended up with the panel and the forum. So I think we just need to take into account of that. I think, Jeff, have a conversation with the team like you're having about, okay, so as we've moved into these new arrangements, how's it working? Is there anything that we can do to improve it? Are we losing people on the way, or are we gaining people? Have we got the balance right? I think those are the conversations to have, and then decide, okay, so what is it that we then need to do? Yeah. And then that can potentially come back to this board
Yeah,
for agreement. Does that sound like a sensible plan?
Yep.
Perfect.
We're all happy with that? Thank you very much. So we've now got delivery and strategy investment plan. Sarah's here if there are any questions. Is there anything you want to add to the report?
No, I don't think so. Take it as read. But
Take
happy
it
to
as
answer any questions.
Any questions? No? No? That's good. Okay.
It is worth mentioning that Councillor David Roby has highlighted a couple of potential errors in the delivery action plan,
Yep.
which is an appendix. We will work with his officers to make sure those are resolved in the final version. If that's okay.
And that's very kind of you to remind me that David sent the letter, so we are taking into account the points he raised. Thank you very much. So we are recommended to comment. We've done that on the work stream delivery strategic investment plan. Thank you, Sarah. So technical programme. Are there any questions on the technical programme? We've got them all there, just for noting. Oh no, we're actually doing more than that. We're recommending. There's five recommendations there.
What happened to one was 1 and 3?
They were on the previous one, but they can flick to and fro. But there you go. You have to keep up, Jeff. I know it's difficult this time of day. Are we happy to do that? Thank you. So now we have communications stakeholder engagement. James, you're going to take us through it, please.
Got to the end. So, hello everybody. It's been just to follow on from Mark's comments. Thank you, Mark, for those generous words. I'll remember them in the future. Just to say thank you to everybody that last time I was here, I asked for help from local authorities to ask comms teams to email and to contact their channel through their own communication channels to get the message out there about the consultation. In that week following the board, we had over 100 responses to the consultation, which the week before we were getting sort of 10 or so just coming out of Christmas, and we saw that keep up quite a way through the consultation, and I'm going to put that down to local authorities' help, so thank you very much for that. Just to say briefly what we did pop-up events, so we had around 100 to 150 people come to pop-up events. I won't go into all of them, but they covered most of the region, sorry. We also use social media to get the messaging out there. LinkedIn seemed to be the best channel for us on that one. And we also had a radio interview as well. So James, one of our officers, spoke on Express FM in Portsmouth, which was quite a novel thing. He managed to sail through some technical difficulties that were their end, not our end, but actually he did a really good job, and he gave 2 plugs for the consultation, which was very welcome. We're looking to do a short comms review now, just to see what we did, what we could do better, etc. Leading into maybe the next time we do something like this. MP meetings, I also emailed all the MPs after the last board as well about the strategy and asking for their help. Following that, we've had 4 requests to meet, so Sojan Joseph, Lauren Edwards, Darren Paffey and Joe Robertson's come back as well, who we had previously arranged to meet. We also met with Peter Swallow from Bracknell. He had a particular interest in the Reading and Waterloo rail service. And that was a good conversation. He came back to us and wanted some more information about that. We've also briefly mentioned about the Integrated National Transport Strategy in Brighton that we also attended. Found that was quite an interesting discussion. The department say the strategy will be due by the end of the year, so that information, or those discussions that happened across the country, will be fed back into their drafting. A few weeks ago, we went to the Interchange Conference in Manchester alongside our other STB colleagues. There's a good opportunity to meet delegates, attend talks and workshops, showcase our own work as well, and also the last chance to discuss our draft transport strategy, which the consultation ended that week, so it was just a final push over the edge. And lastly, sadly, actually, we say goodbye to comms assistant Tia only last week. So we're currently recruiting her replacement, and hopefully we'll have some good news on that to share by the next time we meet in July. So, thank you.
Thank you. And as you say, it's people move on, but we have a good time to do this. So thank you. Any questions? Trevor.
Just briefly, so very positive engagement in Brighton for the regional event. It was very, very positive, a lot of good engagement. I just want to highlight that. So thank you for organising that. The comment you said that there was the outcomes or summary of that engagement will be later this year, or potentially end of the year. I've got a number of very engaged people within the city that would be very interested to know when that is, or if I can communicate that to them at this stage, or whether we might get a feel for when that might be expected.
That's really a DFT thing. I mean, that whole thing, the whole event was a DFT event, and we just helped to bring everybody together. So I think you might need to direct that more towards them, to be honest.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We are moving on. That's great. Any other business? Shall I go around this way? No? Tim? Sorry? Yeah, I will do that.
I've been asked by a local journalist whether there is access to this meeting publicly or not, so I don't know what their position is.
It is a meeting in public, not a public meeting, is that?
Yep.
It is a meeting in public.
They can see what's going on but can't participate.
So if someone wanted to sit here, I think that is fine, but they can't participate, i.e. it's not a public meeting.
So just one final AOB for me. I did comment on 530 pages of paperwork today. So are you happy, or do you have any immediate thoughts on how we could do this? One of the suggestions is that we create a members page on the website so that we can actually go and access these things. But what I'm afraid of is that if we don't get them in front of us, we might not all go to that site to look at the appropriate bit. But shall we give some thought to
Yeah,
that?
we will give some thought to it. And apologies, it was a big pack this for this board. And it's always difficult where we know we've got stuff for information that we want you to have sight of and be aware of, but not necessarily making a decision on. And one of the things we're just toying with, seeing if we can make work. So for local authorities, some of you might have a members room where big appendices go in your members room. So we might be able to do a virtual members room on the website so that those big appendices and the like don't necessarily have to come out in a massive pack, which messes up your systems. But you can go into the members room and pull out what you want. So we're just thinking about it and trying to... yes.
And actually having a members area, you could put the items that are just for consideration for our...
Indeed, yeah.
For us to read and know.
Absolutely.
And then, we can always raise comments about them if we so wish with you beforehand or through the meeting. So that probably seems that.
We will have a think about it. And there's a challenge back to me, which is making sure that we're a little bit more disciplined in the size of documents that we are putting through. So, we don't want to lose the technical and quality that the reports bring. But if we can get it pithier, we'll figure out a way of doing that and figure out how to make it easier for you as well.
So if you're happy that the officers look at that, and if you've got any really whizzo ideas, then send them and talk to the team. That'd be really helpful. Great. Well, thank you all very much for today. The date of the next meeting is the 21st of July at 2 o'clock. It's currently face-to-face in London. So we will see how we go. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, it's going to be elections.